Welcome to the Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens podcast. I'm Brandon Jaffe. Join us as we explore relationship and mental health issues by weeding out the trends in the mental health industry to uncover what truly works in improving our emotional well-being and relationships. At Inspired Resolutions Counseling, we specialize in providing interventions and resources for families with teens, focusing on topics such as teen mental health, parenting challenges, and family dynamics.
This episode is a recording of the Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens group. The voices of the participants have been edited out for confidentiality purposes.
I want to get heavier on making sure that we address the concepts that we've developed over the years that show the proof. It's those concepts that you can remember so that you get into a healthier place as a parent. The whole point of coming to a group like this or getting a therapist, working on your parenting is for what? Why do we do things like this? What's the point? The reason, if you're honest, that you seek people like me out is because your kid is needing some tweaking, right? And if I say, oh, is your kid broken? You're like, no, they're not broken, but... And so then after you talk to me for a little while, I get you to say something like, oh, I need to focus on the relationship with my child. But there's actually another reason that I want you coming to groups, seeking therapy out, participating in supporting others, and that is to get yourself calm and happy. You, parents, deserve happiness. And if you don't deserve happiness, the best way for your child to be influenced by you in a positive way is if you're happy. There's a whole lot of things that we talk about that when it comes to influencing your child, but sending your child to go get fixed and then learning little tricks to help them get fixed is not what helps the family, your happiness, their happiness in the long run. And so I don't want you going in that selfish kind of way, like I'm going to get happy and forget them. But it's if I can't find contentment, if I can't get to a place where in spite of what they're going, I can be okay, you are going to be of no influence on them. And that's really important. Your goal in seeking help should be because you want happiness. And I know we automatically, if you're a decent parent, you want your child to be happy and you would make sacrifices so that your child can be happy. I get all that. I'm not dismissing that completely. But there is a stance and an attitude when it comes to getting your child help and your family help. A lot of parents go and they fail to get the right help because they keep honing in, narrow focused on get the child who's struggling the most or is the loudest, has the most problems, the help. Get them the help, get them the help, get them the help. And some of you have heard me say this before, but when you have a child who's struggling with depression or struggling with defiance or any number of things, when they become the center stage in a family and there are siblings and there are a mom and a dad, the whole family is suffering. The whole family could benefit from care. There's something that's kind of wild, and that's the person in the family with the most issues, with the biggest issue, is usually the last one to seek out and accept help. And families are baffled when I tell them, hey, you know what? That child doesn't want help. That child doesn't see a problem. Therefore, let's focus on everybody else. And that's counterintuitive to the parent mind, right? The parent mind says, fix the problem, fix the problem. Okay, but sometimes you've got to build a foundation around the biggest problem until you have the tools or the readiness for that problem to be fixed. A lot of times the siblings who are suffering from explosiveness and from constant fights, them getting help a lot of times will result in less chaos. Now, when you say, hey, go get help because you have something wrong with you, that's much different than, hey, you deserve to learn to cope with these things. And that brings me to another issue that I wanted to talk about that came up. I gave information to a family, and they were telling me how they sought out help from a therapist that doesn't work with us, and that therapist got honed in on the child. And they were coming in their mind with what I had talked about. Now, the issue was that therapist didn't function like us. Not that they weren't an amazing therapist. They didn't function like this. They weren't coming from the same place. So they zeroed in on the problem child, so to speak. And the parents were frustrated. And so what I said to them was, so communicate the information I gave you with this therapist. And I don't think it turned out to be a good fit. But that was another message I wanted to give you guys. When you're looking for therapists, right, that's a journey. Looking for therapists is a journey. Right now, everybody here, I'm a part of your journey in getting help. At some point, I might not at all be a part of your journey. You find certain help at certain points of your journey, and that's a good thing. And some help feels good, some help clicks, some help doesn't click. You want to follow through. When you have the notion to follow through with help that you've asked for professionally, you want to follow through long enough to make sure before you just bounce because you're not getting the results that you want. But you need to communicate. It is okay to go to one therapist and say, hey, here's what I learned in this support group. Here's what I am thinking. They can say, hey, that's not the direction we're going, or that's not what we do here. But you've got to have the courage and assertiveness enough to communicate with these agencies, institutions, or individuals who you're asking for help from. So in this case, that would have looked like, hey, you know what? I noticed that you're honing in on our one child who has all the problems. We've been to many therapists. He doesn't seem to be open to getting the help I had in mind, because I sat in this support group where I heard from this guy named Brandon that maybe you could help us as a family learn to cope, give them a push in the right direction. Now, again, that might result in, hey, know what, that's not what we do here. Or it might result in that therapist kind of having a different lens on as they assess your family and as they offer you help. I wanted to clarify something about boundaries. And this came from a conversation that I had since the last group. I do not care if you set boundaries. I do not believe you are a bad parent for choosing not to set certain boundaries. I do not have a list of boundaries that I think that you should set. I am not going to tell you what boundaries to set. There are some very specific reasons you set boundaries. Number one, you figure out there's a problem and you want to protect something. Number two, you figure out you have control over the follow-through, is what we call it here. And so you're able to set a boundary because it doesn't require anybody else. Now, that this last one is you also realize you are willing to set the boundary and follow through. And if you're not in a place right now to set a boundary that you think you want to set someday, hey, that's okay. Sometimes we've got to accept where we are in the journey. And if you get too caught up on, man, everybody thinks I should set this boundary and everybody believes that this is what should be going on, you're going to have a really hard time. And the reason you're going to have a really hard time is their journey is not your journey, even if they have some information to give you. I was talking to somebody who was really stuck because they had guilt. They felt so guilty that they couldn't set a certain boundary. When they say the boundary they want to set, I'm cool with it. I think it's a good thing. I do think that it'll be healthy, a healthy part of their growth. But I've also got to accept that they are not ready to set that boundary. And if they set it, they are not going to follow through. And they need to accept that. When they talked to me, the amount of guilt that they had was so distracting that they couldn't focus on the things that they were willing to do and that was causing growth and more healthiness in the family. And so sometimes I want you guys to just accept where you're at. Accepting where you're at does not mean you're giving up. It means that you're being honest with yourself, and then you focus both on the things that you control and the steps that you are willing to take. You focus both on the things that you can control and admit and accept the steps that you are willing to take. And I don't know what might happen that will push you into that next step. And there's another thing. Not all boundaries are necessary for you. You might have a personality that doesn't need to set a certain boundary because you aren't protecting yourself. You're just protecting what other people think you should be protecting. What bothers me and will make me resent somebody is not the same as what will bother you and lead you to resent somebody. Any thoughts on that or comments? And that's a great example. The black bag boundary is essential in my house because I cannot function when my house is not put together. And I could try to fight that, but I'm 45 years old. I'm pretty sure it's going to take longer for me to figure out how to function in a messy, not put together household rather than just going and grabbing a bag and getting it cleaned up the way that I can. And it is worth me eating top ramen for a week to pay for a house cleaner as regularly as I do. Again, that's just me, though. That doesn't make me right. That's just the way that I function. So I love that example. Anybody else have thoughts as I talk about that example? Raise your hand if you struggle with that concept of figuring out which boundaries you should be setting. Your example is perfect for what I'm talking about. You set the black bag boundary. And somewhere in your mind, you thought that it might stoke her to be more clean. And parents have this fantasy, man, if I figure out a way to clean it, they're going to get used to it. And then they're going to start picking up the habit. Or it probably is a combination of that, and you thought it was the right thing to do. But what it wasn't doing was bothering you enough to motivate you to follow through with it. And like you said, your daughter wasn't putting stuff all over the house. It was behind her room. And your investment and your care about what her room is like wasn't enough to follow through on a regular basis to institute the black bag boundary. And that is really important. Sometimes you set a boundary and you think you're doing it because you're protecting yourself, and then you figure out, wow, even the 5 minutes that it takes to follow through with this boundary is too much investment, which means that thing isn't something that's worth protecting. I'm not ever going to claim that boundaries is going to fix everything. I'm not saying that the things that you choose not to set boundaries on or can't set boundaries on aren't going to annoy you still. That's not what I said. But you're setting a foundation. It's an attitude, right? I'm going to focus on the things that I can control. Therefore, I need to take responsibility for any of my annoyances turning into resentments. And if I'm not even willing to put the effort into following through with the boundary, then how in the world could I expect the people in my life that I'm setting the boundaries with to have the motivation, even though we're not doing it to change them? We are never setting boundaries to change them. And so sometimes you set a boundary, and instead of resolving and protecting, what happens is you learn something about yourself. You sometimes learn about what's actually important to you. You sometimes learn about what you actually have control over and what you're willing to take control over. What was it like to realize, oh my gosh, this boundary is not worth it and not something I'm willing to follow through with? I love that you can admit you actually did go into it with that fantasy of she's going to smell a clean room, see a clean room, and then she's going to be motivated to change. And that doesn't work, by the way. If just having a clean house and cleaning up your children's room motivated them to clean, we would be in a much different place. I wouldn't be hearing this issue all of the time. And if you think your child's room smells, just remember that they sleep in it. They are immune to those smells, okay? Those smells only bother you. Just saying. But thank you for sharing that. And that's a really vulnerable thing to share. Admitting that, you know what? This was about my fantasy, not about a healthy boundary. I have one more thing. I just had a very in-depth conversation with somebody about anger in the marriage. There's this thing that I think a lot of couples believe they're doing. Because they're not yelling at each other and they're not having the blowout fights, they don't believe that the anger towards each other is a problem. In this conversation, the issues were kind of attitude and anger at the parents not wanting it, and it's a drastic shift. And so with this couple, they don't yell, but they are not happy with each other. But they couldn't for the life of them figure out why in the world their child would be affected at all by that. Now, while saying that, all of you have heard and probably believe that your children know more than you think that they do, right? Even at a very young age. I hear that all the time. But isn't it interesting that we can say that, but then when it comes to our own children, we don't really believe it. We don't believe it in our soul. My theory with this family is the parents are so resentful, really good people. They are not acting out, but it's palpable, right? I can just see in their body language. Their kids can't describe it, but their kids still experience it and feel it. There's a spirit in the air. There's a culture being built in this home that is not affecting the kids very well. And you really got to think about that, because this conversation went to another level where I even started talking about the mother just made a comment about she's really happy, but like nobody in the family believes that she's happy. So, yeah, but and it's that classic, yeah, but my friends all think that I'm great type thing, and I'm never going to talk to her friends, and her family's probably not asking her friends, hey, do you think she's like happy or not? One of the most important, honest, and valuable things you can do is be honest about the vibe that you're bringing into any situation. Now, I got even deeper with this couple. The mom ended up admitting, you know what? The friends that she's had for a long time, but she's not somebody who likes to smile, right? And that's the way she talked about it. Well, I don't like to smile all the time. That's just not my personality. And I think she said something along the lines of, I'm not the cheerleader type. And I'm going, well, I didn't ask you to be a cheerleader. We're talking about, are you giving the vibe that you're a happy person? If you come home from work, always tired, always negative, always like, oh, leave me alone. Man, you're bringing a bad vibe in. If you overall, like say a couple of nice things about people, but then you throughout the day quadruple that in negative remarks, even if you don't think that they're super negative, guess what? Your vibe is not healthy and is not building the family, is not happy. It's going to be perceived as angry. And so I talk a lot about yelling. I talk a lot about that expressive anger. What about some of you who just both your relationship with your spouse and you as an individual, you're just kind of overall negative, and you might be in denial about it. And I think that's what was so powerful is this person that I was talking to made a very interesting comment. They said, Brandon, talking to you today is the most exhausting thing I think I've ever experienced. That to me is a sign that that person, for the first time in a long time, or maybe the first time ever, is finally willing to hear about themselves. And it is exhausting to realize that you might be bringing a negative vibe, energy, spirit to your family. What I appreciated was this person did not get super defensive. They just said, I'm exhausted. Now, I felt called to say that today for two reasons. Number one, I wanted to talk about how to get really vulnerable. Getting out of denial about yourself. In recovery, does anybody know what they call it in recovery? Character defects. Getting out of denial about your character defects is exhausting, and it is one of the most necessary steps for growing. And if you're focused on how wrong everybody else is in the family, and you might be the least wrong person, but if you're focused on everybody else, you can't make that growth that makes you more influential. And that's one of my main objectives, is to help good parents be more influential in their families. And as I was talking about the anger and stuff with this family, it reminded me of another situation. We have more divorce going on than we've ever had before. And one of the comments that I get is, if this is an example, I'm not saying it's always this gender stereotype, but for instance, an ex-wife might come to me and say, oh my gosh, I did all the parenting, I do all the hard work, I love on my children the most by taking care of them. I'm at all their school events, and who do they love? Their dad. Who are they angry with? Me. Who are they building a larger relationship with? Their dad, who doesn't do half what I do for them. And a lot of times when I break that down with that parent who's saying that, what I realized is they did all the hard work with an attitude that wasn't pleasant. You can do everything in the world for your child, but if you are seen as somebody who's negative, angry, and unhappy or burdened, If you always seem exhausted, you are more likely to be disliked, not given credit, and rejected. A big part of being an influential parent is being happy, is coping with stress. It's taking responsibility for the difficult job that you chose, or I don't know, maybe you didn't choose, maybe you had to do it, but that's where your life led you. So I want parents here tonight to take accountability, take responsibility. It is your job, one of your jobs, to find contentment and happiness and model that for your children. Anybody else struggle with that at times? That right there is the thing that people think that I don't understand when I speak to this. And I don't want to minimize anybody's burden. Some people breeze through life with money and no care. Some people seem to get smacked upside the head with difficult situation after difficult situation after difficult situation. I don't know how you're going to find happiness in your chaotic life with your difficult situations. I'm not going to compare my life to yours by any means. What I do know is that throughout my life, I should be seeking happiness and contentment, right? And there's various healthy ways to do that and various unhealthy ways to do that. And I've done all healthy and unhealthy ways to find happiness. But the moment I decided to have a child, the moment my daughter was born, I had a duty to find contentment and happiness so that I could leave that as a part of my legacy. The parenting relationship is a legacy relationship. It is not a two-way relationship. That is the way God built it. And so I don't know how you can learn to cope. I don't always know what you guys are dealing with. I sound cold when I say this, but I'm going to say it anyways. I don't care what you're going through. If you have children, it is your duty, your job, both for yourself and them, to find contentment and happiness. Man, that's a tall order. That's like, who are you, Brandon? You haven't walked in my shoes. I know. I haven't. I know that there's been studies for many years since before I was born, far before I got into psychology, proving that in the midst of terrible situations and great chaos and tragic loss, people can find incredible contentment, happiness, and the feeling of success and relationship building. A lot of happiness. We are built to be relational people. Therefore, if we are not stoking relationships in our life, we're going to have a harder time finding contentment and happiness. If you're sitting here tonight hearing this going, wow, that's like impossible. I actually resent Brandon for even saying this. It's time for you to ask for help. And if you're going, I don't have the time, I don't have the money, you still ask for help. I don't know when or how you're going to get it. It's time for you to be very diligent in seeking help for yourself. And a lot of you have already done that, right? You're coming to this group. I appreciate you guys letting me speak on those few things first. Now we have someone who I hope I get to see a lot more of. I definitely missed you. Do you mind telling everybody who you are, what originally brought you to group, and what's going on now? We've got a mother who did all the work and is right now tonight admitting that she did all these things but was also an angry parent, and she was going through a divorce. You can't blame her for being an angry parent. And sometimes things that you can't control, seasons of life do cause harm. Sometimes they cause perceived harm. There's another issue, and that's that her son not talking to her might have nothing to do with her. This might be because her son is wrong, and during this season of his life, not kind and not being a good person. I know I'm not supposed to say that about other people, but this might not be about her journey. This is a consequence and damage that somebody else is doing to her. And sometimes your kids damage you. They cause you hurt, they cause you pain, and it isn't your fault all the time. Sometimes they make really bad decisions, regardless of what you do on your end of the relationship. Sometimes really good parents are rejected, and really bad parents are accepted. It's a horrible situation. I wish I had some sort of magical words to fix it and make the world right and make justice something that we can expect of the world, but we can't. Now, what I love about her story is she is not giving up. She's saying, I love you. She's saying good morning, Her heart is open to the relationship. The moment you close your heart to the relationship that person may be damaging, your relationship with them is done. 3 years. She's been waiting 3 years and nothing. And dad, who didn't take care of him at all, is in contact. An aunt who just provides financially gets contacted. And that's heartbreaking and that's hard. And I wish I had more for her tonight. She did admit to us again that she was at one point that angry parent. And there's this word that I thought of that's really important. It's a skill, it's an act that I think every human should get good at making, and it's called making amends. We talk about I'm sorry's all the time. In fact, I catch myself doing it. I said it to somebody just recently. I want, you got to say sorry for what you just did to me. And I try not to say that in my life. I can't force anybody to have the heart to make an amends to me. Making an amends is acknowledging the wrong that you did, regardless of your justifications, regardless of what that other person did. Making amends is I'm willing to acknowledge, and if there's something that I can fix, I'm going to fix it. It's letting that person know, if it's safe, I'm willing to attempt to fix this hurt that I caused. What gets in the way of making amends is sometimes we think, oh, I'm sorry is sufficient. Sometimes we don't think that we should make an amends because the other person did something more wrong. But hey, you know what? Son, I love you. Don't like being rejected. I acknowledge that I might have been difficult to be around. I acknowledge my anger. I acknowledge my unhappiness. And when you come back into my life, that is something I'm working on and going to continue to work on. In fact, if you want to respectfully reflect to me, hey, that thing you used to do is going on, I'm going to listen. See, that's what an amends sounds like. I'm sorry that you think that I hurt you so bad. I was just trying to be the best parent that I could, and your dad made it really hard for me. That is not an amends. We as adults, we as humans, are not very good at making amends. In fact, we don't even teach it. I'm realizing right now as I speak this out, we teach our children to say sorry, thank you, please. But I don't think we put enough effort into having them make amends. Having them sit and think about, well, okay, you did this thing to this person. You called them this name. They felt rejected. You said sorry, but did you make some extra effort to spend some time with them? Did you give them, over the last few weeks, a special effort to tell them what was good about themselves? See, that's making an amends. And amends is actions. We don't teach kids that. We don't do it well as humans. In fact, a lot of times when I do the amends work, it's with addicts. And it's so easy with addicts, right? Because when they're in their early recovery, they're like, oh, man, I can tell you all the stuff that I damaged. A lot of it's financial. A lot of it's just totally obvious. Once they breeze through the obvious stuff, it becomes a little more difficult, like making amends for the fact that they were selfish before they even started using drugs. Does anybody struggle with amends in their life? I'm so glad you're willing to share that you admit you're the parent that's angry, you're the parent that's not able to make amends, and the reason is you feel justified because of their behavior. Because they aren't doing the right thing. They aren't saying the right thing. They are treating you poorly. That's where the justification comes in. Now, I want you to put words to it. It would look something like this. I am justified in having a bad attitude towards my daughter and speaking harshly to her most of the time because she doesn't listen to me when I ask her to clean the dishes. She doesn't do her homework, and she treats me like I'm not worth anything. And I think that's probably a good exercise for all of us to do, is say out loud, I am justified in my anger, my discontentment, my attitude towards these people because this is what they're doing to me. Do you mind practicing that for us real quick? I disagree with you. You are justified. Your daughter stained, maybe purposefully, while having a bad attitude and treating you poorly day in and day out, stained your furniture, is making major damage that you have to replace. She can't pay for it. You can't make her pay for it. And you are justified in your anger. You are justified in having a bad attitude, 100%. The problem is it's not helping you become more influential, and staying stuck in that engagement isn't at all helping you find happiness. This is going to sound wild. Look, I don't know. Some of your kids, we've had through the years, many parents who've come in and said, my child is so defiant that they are damaging walls, they are damaging furniture. They just broke into my room that I locked and stole this, and that. Now, what's wild is most of those families that I can think about, once the parent started accepting what they actually have control over and finding contentment outside of the parenting relationship, that outrageous behavior, oddly enough, went away. Now, I'm not saying it's going to go away. I cannot guarantee that. But right now, you're stuck in that pull. You're stuck in that chaos with your daughter, and she brings you in, and you're justified in joining her in that chaos. What a hard thing to do, to say, as a grown adult who's worked your butt off your whole life, to say, because my child is underage, I don't have control over what they ruin in my home. Man, that's not fair. That's not right. There are these parents and these professionals who tell parents who are stuck in a situation like yours, oh, well, why don't you just do this? How are you just letting it happen? I'm not letting it happen. What am I supposed to do? Call the cops? What are the cops going to do? Why don't you kick them out of the house? Because I can't. It's illegal. Why don't you take all their electronics away? Because they're bigger than me, and they kicked down the door and got it out of the place that I was hiding it. And I've said so many times to parents, you don't have control. Your child has control over your home, and I am so sorry for that. You don't deserve this. Now what are we going to do? How are we going to find happiness? How are we going to be content, even though you're not happy about what's going on around you? In the chaos that you are living, how are you going to find contentment? It's as tall an order as asking a mother whose child refuses to speak to her just because she tried to be a parent. How are you going to find contentment, even though you are being hurt for 3 years? How are you going to be consistent in loving on your child, not loving your child, loving on your child when they reject you so thoroughly? I do believe you got to have boundaries, right? I'm not saying just let your house get broken. I will help you set the boundaries that you can control. But the spirit is, my child is controlling things that they have no right to control. They are breaking things. They are causing damage. And so I'm going to set boundaries because they can't take me down with them completely. But I'm also going to be of open arms. And I'll give you an example of major boundaries. There are some times that because your child is so wrapped up in drugs and bringing such an unhealthy element, and they are so dangerous that you do have to kick them out. You do have to call the cops on them. That doesn't mean that you're not constantly loving on them in any way that you can, while being willing to be of open arms if they come back to you healthy. And you can say that often. I love you, and I am not going to give up on you. I have not given up on you. And then they're going to give you the bird and tell you, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, whatever. And they're going to make you feel horrible. But you see, you're consistent in who you want to be and how you want to act as a parent. It's the most powerful decision you will ever make in the parenting journey. I am determined to be the man, the parent that I want to be, regardless of how my child is behaving. And when I don't like who I am willing to make amends and get better at being that man. I have not reached being the man, the parent, the partner that I want to be, but I'm going to keep working at it. Anybody else on that journey with me? You're focusing on you and your journey and the things that you control. What is the next step in growing towards a more content life for you? When you think about, oh man, I don't know what to do. And that question, she's not alone in that. When I say, hey, what's the next step that you're willing or able to take? We get stuck, right? We get in this place with our children or in life circumstances where we go, I don't know what to do. There isn't anything I can do. Think small and take a look at you, yourself. There's always something you can do. And a good stance to take, and here's the concept for the night, is focus on your 6 pillars. When you frame things, the 6 pillars of your life, ideas start to open up in terms of what you can focus on. I take a look at mental health as one of my pillars. Gosh, I'm getting yelled at. I don't have control in my life. Have I taken the steps to get the help that I need? Am I going to the groups that I need to go to? Am I getting the help from a therapist if that's what I need to? If I can't afford that, am I reading about whatever? Am I putting the time, effort, and energy into my own mental health, or am I more worried about the people's mental health in my family? Relationships, another pillar. Am I obsessed with just the few relationships in my household that are causing all the chaos, angst, and anger in my life? Or am I remembering I'm not just a parent, I'm also a wife or husband, I'm also a friend, I'm also a cousin, I'm also a daughter or a son? Am I remembering that I have to put time, effort, and energy into all of my relationships in order to be whole and okay? Or am I putting all my time, effort, and energy into being a parent because that's the only relationship that I can think about right now? Another pillar, physical health. Am I putting time, effort, and energy into my physical health? Am I eating the right things? Am I going to the doctor when I need to go to the doctor? Or is my whole life all about navigating the kids' doctor's appointments? Am I exercising on a regular basis? You ask the OC parent, it's, yeah, I eat after I feed the children, and usually I'm just eating off their plates. I'm too tired to make the meal that I want. Or, yeah, I'm exercising. No, I'm not exercising. And, well, if I really need to, I'll go to the doctor. But you haven't been to the dentist for yourself. You haven't been to your yearly checkup, and you're not actually doing everything you can, putting time, effort, and energy into your physical health. Number 4, are you putting time, effort, and energy into your career or your education? I talk to some people, they're like, yeah, my career, that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm focused on, right? And you're either a parent or you're working. But for some people, stay-at-home mom, it's like, well, my job is my kids. No, it's not. That's a relationship. Well, I'm not going to go work. Okay, that's fine. But are you doing something? It might be as little as taking a Spanish class once a week because you're furthering your education. There is something that is so freeing and so important in terms of building your identity when you don't think of your job as your children. That is a relationship, and you still need to put something into the career/education pillar. I've had parents over the years start numbers of little side gigs because they finally listened to me. And now some of them make a whole lot more money than I do and work a whole lot less, right? And I've had so many people take classes and meet people because they took those classes that they never would have thought of. Spirituality, time, effort, and energy. I have some parents say, oh, no, it's fine because I'm going to church every Sunday. And I have some people say, well, I'm atheist. That's not a part of my life. I don't care. You're putting time, effort, and energy into spirituality. That's your connectedness to higher power, to the people as a whole around you, your moral compass, your values. Do you know that there are parents out there who just arbitrarily make up their value system in their home and they're not really happy about it? And they were just copying something because they don't put time, effort, and energy into the spirituality piece of their life? And again, I know I'm adding a lot into that spirituality piece, and some people wouldn't lump that all together, but I am. It's the morals, the values, your connectedness to higher power, your purpose in life. That's all spirituality. That's what we're exploring and thinking about when we put time, effort, and energy into the spirituality piece. That is such an important part of your identity. And so many parents just brush that under the rug. I don't need to put weekly, daily effort into that. Sure you do. Do you know how many parents in the Christian community are more worried about their child's spirituality than their own? They ruin their entire Sunday arguing about church instead of just saying, cool, my difficult child's not going to join me. Now I'm focused on my spirituality today. The last one, hobbies. Going to baseball games for your child is not a hobby. That is you participating in your child's both exercise and hobbies. Just because you used to have a hobby doesn't mean you have a hobby now. Hobby, recreation is so important to our identity. I'm not saying you got to put all your time into hobbies, but you should have a few hobbies. You should be trying things out. And what gets in the way is parents tell me, but I don't know what I like, or I can't do the things that I like. I didn't say find your hobby that you're passionate about, by the way. I just said put time, effort, energy into hobbies. It might be that you spend 3 years exploring a whole bunch of hobbies that you decide that you don't like, but you've put the time, effort, and energy into hobbies. There's two areas that I actually think way against society right now. And that's, I don't think your hobbies have to be your passions. It's really nice when they become your passions. And if you need to get a job or a career, don't start by trying to think about what your passions are. That is silly. You don't know. That's just absurd. You're going to be thinking about that in your head forever. Try some things. Apply for jobs and try out hobbies. So when I give you those 6 pillars, you have a better idea of where you can start in terms of taking the next step in your journey as a human being who happens to also be a parent? I'm going to interrupt you because you're doing the classic mistake. When I ask parents, what's your next step? I like that you have a next step. You want to put more time, effort, and energy. You notice I keep saying that. Put more time, effort, and energy. I didn't say perfect your spirituality. I didn't say perfect all your relationships. It's I'm going to put a more balanced time, effort, and energy into my 6 pillars. But then you started saying, when my kids are gone, that's when I'll work on it. When I have more time, that's when I'll work on it. That's the problem, people. You've got to put the pillars into balance. That's not equal time. But if you feel like you don't have time to balance out your life, it's kind of mind-blowing what happens when you start from a different lens of, I'm going to make decisions about where I put my time based on what's healthy in terms of balancing out my pillars. And it might be, oh my gosh, my child just tried to argue with me for like 4 hours and I didn't even give them the time of day because I was too busy. In fact, I left so that I could go read this book at the park. It's this spiritual book that I was really wanting to read. What happens is you start shifting things. I've had parents tell me, well, you don't understand. I am barely making it. I'm living paycheck to paycheck. I get it. I get it. It is a miracle, though. When I have parents who focus on balancing out the pillars regardless of their situation. I have had hundreds of parents over the years say, I don't know how this all worked out, but I just spent the last handful of months trying to make sure I'm putting time, like you said. You see, you can't fathom having it in balance until you try to put it in balance regardless of your situation. You start realizing, oh, wow, this thing in my life is unhealthy and it can't have as much time as I want. That's kind of similar to something I talk to parents about. You have a child who you think requires all your time, effort, and energy. And I say, don't. Let it go. Stop parenting them. You got 2 other kids. You have a husband or a wife. You have a job. You need to go to with your friends. What do I do? Just leave them at home? Yeah, you're going to have to. But what if they burn down the house? I've said this now for like 15 years. I still have 0 houses burned down because parents decided to stop parenting so much. But then they're going to get away with things. Yeah, I get it. I came up with the 6 pillars as a way to help addicts find balance in their lives, because what happens when you're an addict is all your time, effort, and energy went to the drug and whatever other unhealthy things. Then you get into recovery, and they would only focus on recovery. They'd be like 90 days into treatment and going to 10 meetings a week and hanging out with their friends, right? And they didn't have balance. And so I started speaking about that. And man, addicts really reject the 6 pillars until they don't. But whether it's addicts or parents, I realize that it is applied to parents and everybody as well, is that when you decide to seek that balance, not only do miracles happen, but you start realizing what was important and what wasn't important. You realize how much time you're wasting putting effort into things that you don't control. It's going to take you time. I'm not saying you're going to get that balance tomorrow, but now you have a place to start. Somebody who puts balance into their pillars is going to be a more influential parent. If I have balance in all 6 pillars, am I going to be an angry parent? No, I'm going to get angry occasionally, but I'm not going to take on that identity of being an angry parent. I'm going to have too many aspects to my healthy identity. So many of you parents have put all your identity eggs into one basket. That's not healthy. I don't care what society says. I don't care what your parents say. I don't care who's giving you a guilt trip. You are more than just a parent. I don't care if you quit your job so that you could take care of your 3, 4, 5, 10 kids. You are still more than just a parent. That is one role that you play. Anybody hate hearing that? I really appreciate you sharing that, and to hear that in just a few weeks. So you said that a few weeks ago you heard me talking about the 6 pillars. So you signed up for classes for yourself, you started working out, and you started reading. Those are 3 major steps. I mean, I never hear people putting that much effort in just a few weeks into balancing out their pillars. As difficult as your relationship was with your son, the thing that you changed, I know that you're not yelling as much, but by the way, if you are putting effort into your 6 pillars, you're not going to yell and argue as much. You got stuff to do. You've got to have other areas of focus. It's easier to let things go when you have a life, so to speak. In your story, you changed 3 things that had nothing directly to do with parenting. And the result is your child seeking you out and your child wanting to go to dinner with you because you brought a new tradition in where you and your husband and your child go to dinner. This isn't like a situation where this is a compliant, easy child. This child who was rejecting mom felt compelled when he didn't think there was going to be dinner because dad was gone for the day, said, hey, aren't we going to go to dinner? And as small as that might seem to some parents, I know for you that's this big, that's huge. And again, these changes are happening in the relationship, I believe, because she's becoming healthier and less obsessed with trying to change her child. She still wants her child to do better, be successful. She hasn't lost the fantasy and the desire to be a good parent, but she shifted the lens and she shifted the focus. It almost seems magical, doesn't it? How could me taking 3 steps in balancing out my 6 pillars correlate with my child seeking me out now when my child was only rejecting me before? Well, it's because you're happier, and guess what? You're not so terrible to be around now. I'm so proud of you, and I'm so happy for you. Good job. So this week, as we close, first off, I'm going to challenge every parent to really think about not just do you think you're happy? Do those around you, including your children, experience you as being a happy person? And then ask yourself, like I asked her, what is the next step for me to focus on? Mental health, relational health is all about a lot of little tiny steps. That's why good therapy, it can be so frustrating because a lot of time, right, you come in during the crisis, but then 90% of the therapy happens when you don't even realize the work that's being done because you're focused and honed in on little tiny steps. Well, one way to make decisions about the next step that you're going to take is look through the framework of what are my 6 pillars? Where am I out of balance? What could I do next? Not how can I change my child? And the odd, magical thing in that is it's going to make you a more influential parent in the long run.
The Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens podcast is an Inspired Resolutions production. Hosted by Brandon Jaffe. Edited and mixed by Natalie Atkinson. Music by Natalie and Sean Atkinson. Inspired Resolutions Counseling is based in Yorba Linda, California. Whether you're interested in joining our group, seeking therapy services, or exploring more of our resources, you can find us on our website, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Inspired Resolutions Counseling.